Well guys, 14 years. 14 years we've been waiting on this new Hayabusa, and Suzuki's finally let us know all the specs on it, what it looks like. I mean, I'm stoked. 14 years in the making, this bike is gonna be sick. It's gotta be like, you know, a turbo bike or something like outrageously like a 250 horsepower naturally aspirated bike. Let's check out the specs, see what it's packing. Horsepower, it makes less horsepower. It makes less horsepower. It makes less horsepower. Okay, so the old model made 197 horsepower, and the new one makes 188. Maybe, you know what? Maybe it's cheaper. Ugh. So the old bike MSRP was $14,799. The new one is $18,599. You know what? I bet I know what it is. I bet they did a lot of updating to the dash on this bike. I bet it's like full LCD screen, you know, like all the little, you know, full color TFT display. I bet it's got all the bells and whistles. They changed the gear indicator to a very small TFT display. Huh. Where's this $3,800 coming from? And why is the new generation bike less powerful than the old generation Busa? Alright guys, let's dive right into this one. It's JoeSTi here, and I had a few people ask me about making a video for the new 2022 Hayabusa, and the weather's been absolutely terrible here, so I figured why not just go ahead and have a little sit down chat with you guys, let you know my thoughts on the bike, let you know if I would buy this bike, and why Suzuki really screwed up releasing this bike instead of a turbo Busa, or at least a like absolutely updated bike. Don't get me wrong, it's probably a good motorcycle, but it's an expensive bike for what you're getting here. So at a glance of this bike, it has new LED lights, it has a new tail section, it has new fairings that are hit and miss on. For me personally, I like the front end of the bike. I don't like the tail section of the bike, and I don't like that little chrome trim that they put on the side. It's just not my thing, but then again, I like the Gen 2 Busa tail, whereas a lot of people really didn't, and a lot of people did the Gixxer swap on that tail. So I'm gonna go over some points on this bike, some good, some bad, and really just try to guide you in my thoughts, being a Gen 2 Turbo Busa owner myself, and what I really think of the bike. Now, first things first, let's dive into the power of the bike. Yes, it makes less peak power. It looks like, compared to the 2020 model, it's down about 9 horsepower. These are peak numbers. They are not consistent with what the bike makes throughout the RPM band, which Suzuki is claiming that the new bike has more power under the curve, which would mean driving around on town, you're gonna feel that power, but I mean, when you're full blast in it, peak power means a lot, because when you shift a bike, you're only dropping a couple thousand RPMs at most, and then you're right back into the top end of that power band. But if you're using the bike more for a touring bike or more for a around town bike, you do want that power down low on the RPM band versus being up at the top end. Another thing to think about on this is Euro 5 is really hard to make power on these bikes with all the regulations that they're getting from the EPA on this stuff. So who knows, maybe you put a pipe and a tune on this bike and it picks up like 30 horsepower. I doubt it, being that it's naturally aspirated. I would guess that this bike uncorked is probably going to be pretty similar to a Gen 2 Busa, and I would say it's probably going to be somewhere around 190 at the tire, maybe. We haven't seen enough on this bike yet to really know for sure what it's going to make. The bike itself has the same compression ratio as the old bike. Suzuki is claiming lighter and stronger pistons on this, so that might be good for us turbo guys. We may be able to push this bike a little bit further. I would still assume that we're going to have to drop the compression a little bit, probably a head spacer or something like that, but that would save us from having to actually put lower compression pistons in to hold the power. Not that the Gen 2 Busa can't hold a good amount of power stock. I mean, just with the head spacer, Gen 2 Busa will do like 330 to 350 at the tire and be completely fine. I think Suzuki really missed a good opportunity, and they should have went a little bit more in on this bike. They should have done something like a turbo bike or something like that. Just you're calling it your halo bike. Like Kawasaki has the H2 and it's a halo bike. It is a supercharged 1000cc motorcycle. I don't think it's direct competition for the Busa in stock form. The Busa has always been more of a sport touring bike, but now Suzuki is calling this new 2022 a top-of-the-line sport bike. That gets kind of into a gray area. What is a sport bike? Is it the same thing as a super sport, but with a little bit more relaxed position on the handlebars? I'm not entirely sure, but if you're calling it a top-of-the-line sport bike, I would think that you would want it to actually have more power than the last generation that you released on this bike. Okay, so enough about the horsepower on the bike. I think they missed a lot here just because they should have done more with the generation change, especially with all of the rumors that have been coming out like, oh, Suzuki's going to be doing a turbo bike. They're doing a turbo bike. Finally, it's happening. But everybody was kind of let down when that wasn't the case. So let's go on to the electronics of the bike. Suzuki finally got with the times. They put a quick shifter on it. They put a auto blipper on this bike. So it's up to date with that because most bikes nowadays come with at least a quick shifter and a lot of them have an auto blipper on it. It does have the little TFT display that is right in the middle where the old gear indicator was, and it still has analog for RPM and analog tach for speedo. I personally like that. I personally like seeing the needle. It's just easier for me to see to shift. On a sub 200 horsepower bike, it's not that big a deal. When you start turboing these bikes, it becomes more of a big deal. It's a lot easier for me to see it. I like it on the H2 how they have the little LCD TFT display and they have the actual tach as a needle. I like that. Now the one thing that I can't knock Suzuki for, because they're one of the only manufacturers that does this, like very few people do this, they have a fuel gauge on the bike. I love it. Other manufacturers need to get on with this and everybody needs a fuel gauge. I don't really care like, oh, it's got a low fuel light. I don't care. A fuel gauge is necessity in my book. It's nice to know that you have half a tank. It's nice to know that you're not going to be out in the middle of nowhere and your fuel light come on and then, oh crap, I've got to find a gas station in the next 25 to 30 miles or whatever, you know? It's just something nice to have. In terms of comfort for a sport bike or sport touring bike, whatever you want to call this bike, the Hayabusa is really nice. I like riding the Busa. If you were to put a turbo on a Busa, you could race a Busa, cruise a Busa. I mean, I could do 500 miles no problem on my Busa, where like on a bike like my H2, it's rough. It is rough. The direct competition for this bike was the ZX14R. So the ZX14R and the Busa were pretty much the two direct competitors. And I think Suzuki just priced themselves out of that. The 2021 ZX14 starts at $15,100. So you're talking a $3,500 difference between a Suzuki and a Kawasaki for essentially a very similar motorcycle. They're both comfortable. They're both big CC bikes. They're bigger bikes. If I was looking at a Busa and a ZX14 next to each other, $3,500 is plenty to make me really look at the ZX14 over the Hayabusa. So one thing you got to think about if you're buying this bike to race this bike is it's a heavy bike and it makes less power than the outgoing 1000cc bike. So like you look at a Gixxer 1000, a Gixxer 1000 makes more power and is quite literally over 100 pounds less than the Hayabusa. So power to weight ratio, this is not going to beat modern 1000cc bikes out of the gate. Now you start adding nitrous, you start adding a turbo onto the bike, and sure, it can get really fast. The other thing is with being a new generation, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of R&D into turbo kits that are coming out, like RCC kits and all of that, depending on how different the motor actually is. Suzuki's claiming there's like 500 changes to this bike, and a lot of them are internal engine changes and different fueling setup. I think that they basically just angled the injectors differently, but that's most likely just for fuel mileage and to pass Euro 5 is my guess on that. I doubt that it actually supports more power, but we'll see. Once these bikes start hitting, I'll get a better perspective of what they are doing real world. Right now we're just looking at spec sheets. So one thing that you can do on these bikes, and the old Busas were the same, is the exhaust is just gigantic on this motorcycle. I would say immediately get rid of the exhaust, shave 30 plus pounds probably, like no joke, probably 30 plus, because it's a dual side exhaust that is gigantic, and I personally hate the looks of it. So You could drop weight pretty fast on this bike. Not saying you can get down to leader bike weight though. In terms of color combo, they have 3 separate color combos that you can choose from. One being black with kind of like this bronze type finish next to it. I'm not a huge fan of it. The other one is silver and red. I do like that color combo. And the last one is pearl white with like this weird frost blue. I really like pearl white bikes. That would be my favorite color. Had they not done this little bit of frost blue with it, I personally would have done the red with the white or white and black, you know, one or the other. But I mean, you can always change that stuff up after the fact. If you have any money left after you buy this motorcycle. I mean, Jesus, $18,599 plus $395 destination charge. Out of all of the biggest letdowns of this bike, that is number one. I can't believe, I mean, you're going to be over 20 grand after tax on this bike just to have a sub 200 horsepower bike. We are getting dangerously close to like Ninja H2 SX territory. I mean, we are over, you know, ZH2 territory. That's a naked bike though. I would say this is more of a competitor with an H2 SX, which is mid-20s, but you're getting a supercharged bike for that. Suzuki did finally update to LED lighting on the bike. Big whoop. All bikes are LED now, basically. Aprilia even went LED. I know! Finally, right? The Tuono is getting LED lights. The RSV4 is getting LED lights. I don't see where this extra money is coming from. So, you get LED lights. You get a very small little TFT display right in the middle. You're getting less horsepower. You're getting a newer looking bike that still kind of looks a little dated in my opinion. I just don't see it, guys. Like, yeah, you get a quick shifter and you may get some lean sensitive traction control now. Who cares? Turn it all off. I don't think it's $3,800 more than the last bike. And that was MSRP. I saw new Gen 2s going for like 11 grand. And if you're looking at a new Gen 3, which is absolutely not going to be discounted when it first hits, there's no way. I mean, these are going to be a hot bike just because it's the new generation. So you're looking at like, you can get a Gen 3 for 20 grand out the door, or you can get a Gen 2 for like 11.5 out the door. That's a big difference. You could literally buy a Gen 2, put a turbo kit on it, make mid 300 wheel horsepower, put the compression spacer on it, and still be 20 grand into that bike, or you can have a stock Gen 3. Now guys, don't think I'm just ragging on this bike just to rag on it. I like the bike. I wouldn't go out and sell my Gen 2 to buy one. It's so much money for a step back in power. When everybody thought this was going to be like a huge leap forward, everybody thought this was going to be like, you know, they should have done what Suzuki did. Suzuki came and dropped this H2 on everybody, and they're like, it makes 200 horsepower, but it's got a supercharger. And I think Suzuki should have done the same thing. They should have put like a little turbo on it, you know, like maybe like a 20G turbo or something that size, and then like, yeah, it makes like 220 horsepower, and then you flash it, and it makes like 250, like the H2, you know, you flash an H2, it makes like 240 to 250, because at 10,000 RPMs, all of a sudden the throttle plates start closing. Suzuki should have done that. I think I'm gonna let this bike come out and see what it actually does. I don't wanna rag on it without seeing real world performance results. Now, Suzuki missed a big marketing standpoint because they didn't do something crazy, but at the same time, I can't blame them because the Hayabusa is a really, really good selling bike, and most of the people buying Hayabusas aren't racing them. They're just riding them around because they're comfortable, they're big, they're roomy, they make a good bit of power for a sport bike, but not a super sport bike, and that's a majority of what they're selling it to. What I do think they missed the ball on, obviously I've said it enough, is the price is ridiculous. Get out of here with that, Suzuki. Nobody wants to pay 20 grand for a stock Busa. I mean, bro, what are you doing? Now there's a lot of stuff that this bike is claiming to have. I'm going over the big things and what I think on the bike. Let me know if I missed anything here that you guys want me to talk about, and let me know what you guys think about this style of video of me just really giving my thoughts on a bike. The weather's been absolutely crap, so I haven't been able to get you guys videos, and I really wanted to do something so that you guys have some sort of content, and a few people have asked me about this. So First of all, let me know if you like this. Second of all, always like and subscribe. Third of all, drop a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think of the new Busa. Let me know if you would buy one or if you would go ahead and buy a Gen 2 and do whatever you want with that for half the price. Thanks for watching, guys. Until next time.